My name's Ronnie Pace. Wanted to tell my story to you today. I don't know how well this is going to go over, but I leave it in God's hands. And I'd like to pray before that, if I may, and just ask God to keep His hand upon us during this and keep my wit, so at least somebody could maybe benefit by what I have to say. Thank you. It starts. I'm 48 years old. Life started with me as a fight. I was premature, and I was born 8 months. I was in an incubator for about a month, and almost died at birth several times because of pneumonia. But God, in His ultimate wisdom, has kept me somehow through all this for no reason I know. I know that most kids' first memories are of their bike or of their doll or something that they received. Mine was about 3 years old, and it was a spiritual realm. It came to me as in a messenger of Satan, in the form of my cousin. And I had been sleeping on a cot with my other cousin, and something ran past the bed and the head of the cot, and I followed after it. It looked like my cousin Carmen, which was still in diapers and couldn't walk. And so I chased after it, and getting into the kitchen, it disappeared. And so I was thirsty and a little boy, and I took a chair and scooted it up to the sink, stepped on the sink, and got down there and was drinking water with my hands out of the faucet, and felt a pressure. Somebody snatched me by the back of my head and tried to force me down into the water, and then it was gone. And for years I fought with that struggle and thought, can a spirit or something from the spiritual realm actually touch you? And one needs to go no farther but to read Scripture, and it is physically possible. And my life, up to about the age of 4, pretty much normal, except at 4 my mother and father got a divorce, and they separated, and my father went to prison. He went and spent 5 years in Leavenworth. And during that time I was allowed to go and visit him, and the way that the man's house my father was in treated him and me started building a resentment and a hatred for authority. I don't believe any child at that age should be allowed to go see a parent, to see any parent in a prison setting, because it built a hatred in me for authority, for what they was doing to me and my father. I didn't understand it. Well, during this time, that was building, and all this was starting to gather in me, and I started to act out more. By the age of 10, no one could tell me anything. Basically, I was my own man, I thought. And most kids, but I was running wild on the streets. My mom worked, and I didn't have a father, and I was an only child. So I stayed with my aunt, who was drank a lot, put it that way. And so it created a lot of different situations in my life even then. We moved to Florida. My father was in prison, and my mother and I moved to St. Petersburg. And I got a job on a pier, and I was just taking off fish off of hooks and cleaning the boats, and I got to go out free every day. I met a guy named Russell. And in that time period, that's when I first seen the power that a weapon held over a man. My mom had a boyfriend, and he refused to give up my father's rings that he had on his hands. And I had been carrying my first rifle from about the age of 6. But I had 22 in the bedroom, and I just went in slowly and got it, put it to the back of his head, and he come off the rings. But, as a kid, it showed me the power, even as a child, that I could have over a man with a weapon. And I didn't think it was really ingrained at that time, but I think it did. Because that became a lot of my life. Intimidation and whatever, to get what you want. I've done after my father had got out of prison, I was 9, it was shortly after that, and we moved back from Florida and moved in with him, and my mom and him didn't have, they wasn't working out too well, a lot of past issues and everything else, so they separated and I went to live with my father, which was in a shooting gallery, really. They robbed drugstores, and he had a cowboy car, all that, 68 Firebird. And they would just go pop the door, get the cabinet, and throw it all in before the police could get there. Basically, it's called cowboy. Or they would cut a hole in the roof, and a small one, and they would send me through that, or rafters, or ventilation, anything that they could get me up over the cabinet with, and I would pop the cabinet with a screwdriver, and then get them the bag of dope up. But I did this with my father for a while, and my father included me in just about all his crime. Why, I don't know at this age. I later come to realize that my father didn't have the same kind of love for me as I had for him. I laid in a motel room for 3 days, and I hadn't cried since I was a little boy. And that's all I did. I couldn't stop. But I come to the realization my father didn't have the same kind of love for me that I had for him, or he wouldn't have done that to me. Allowed me to see the things I did. At the age of 10, about 10 and a half, my father cut a man in half with a sawed-off shotgun in my kitchen, and was frantic about it. I started screaming. That's the first time I ever remember my dad slapping me, and open-handedly, and made me clean the mess up off the wall while he rode the guy up in the road. Took him down, put him in the trunk of the car. I say that I didn't know if I should really give that in this testimony, but I think you need to know where I was at in order to understand where God has brought me. And I would live this life. I got the first shot of dope at 12, did my first robbery at 14, shot my first man at 14. So I ended up, my dad had ingrained in me, indoctrinated me, and us against the world, and how bad the police are, and all this. And at the age of 15, my father was taken from me and murdered. He was in a jail cell in Wyandotte County Jail, and a man named Frank Centillion shot him to death with a .22 pistol while he was sitting in his cell playing cards. They held the pistol up in front, wouldn't let the paramedics back for 35 minutes. My dad was alive for about 22 minutes of that because he had drowned in his own blood. And I was allowed to see this in jury trial of this man, Frank Centillion. They put him 2 weeks prior to the shooting, buying the pistol from a man in a bar. Guy testified that he had sold him the pistol. They wouldn't allow the paramedics back for 35 minutes. They said the pistol was still in the cell block, and the whole time it came out in jury trial that it was in the control center. So they allowed my dad to drown. And hearing upon this, I lost what was left of my mind at that time. And went off the deep end. I was in a courtroom and swung the crutch at a judge. And I was on crutches because of an ankle injury, and swung a crutch at the judge, and they tried to restrain me, and I caught several other assault cases, including I ripped the prosecutor's arm real bad by eating it. I wouldn't let go, I just kept eating it. And I was a kid looking at this, but I had lost as a child, it had been ingrained in me. I lost any kind of respect I ever had for the law at that point in my life. Like, how could they allow this man to walk, set him free when he'd done that to my father and my family? It took me up to quite a few years to understand a lot of that. I never got out of the morning stages of anger, and then it turned to rage. Well, at the age of 28, after I escaped in 87, they gave me another 2 years running wild with my sins. 12 me young and everything, and I ended up doing it. So I did 12 flat years, and they had to let me go at that time. And after a short stint playing ball, I had a chance to play professional ball. Prison wouldn't let me go at a young age, so I was trying it at an older age and hurt myself roofing, and got back on drugs and went to robbing dope houses, dressing up like DEA, and I had a little squad, and we would go in and rob them and take all the dope, mostly coke houses. I didn't do cocaine, but I would take it and sell it on the street through someone else. So that was good for me because I wasn't using my own supply, I thought. But there's also 17 kids in that time period that I took care of. And all of them were kids that didn't have mothers that were respectable. They would take the food stamps and spend them all on drugs, so the kids had nothing. So about once a month I'd take them kids shopping, and I'd fill their ice boxes. But I did this all through theft, stealing, robbing. That's how I justified what I was doing in my own mind. Because if not, I wouldn't have been able to live with the guilt. Because I believe that our guilt is what causes us to self-destruct. So you have to, in order to forgive, I believe that you have to first forgive in order for yourself to be forgiven. Because God says, if you forgive, you shall be forgiven. In order to be forgiven, you must first forgive everybody around you. And you know how hard it was for me to start forgiving authority and everything that I had built in my mind. But through this all, that same messenger of Satan was buffeting me. He was stealing my life. He was still pulling strings, and he was still winning. I took on a war that I couldn't win. I took it on against any authority figures, anybody in my life, and to me that was justifiable because of what they'd done to my father. But in reality, they ain't the ones who done it to my father. It was that same demon that had been buffeting me, because it had been buffeting him first. And I believe it was carried on. And so I went to prison, and after getting out of all of this, I'm on the street and I'm a madman. I'm robbing anything and everything. I don't care. I'm shooting dope, and I'm starting on methamphetamine. And I had a bonding company, and make any bond I had, it didn't matter. Millions of dollars, it didn't matter. And I'd never have to co-sign, I didn't do anything. I'd just make the bond, then I'd go give them the money. They'd ask me how long. I said, a week. $20,000, whatever, a week. I didn't have $20,000 left now. I didn't have a dime in my pocket. I had a pistol. But I'd go get their 20 grand so I could stay free. I ended up catching 12 cases. They just started rolling. Caught 6 cases in one day because the man told on me for stealing equipment that I'd sold him, and he got caught with it in his barn. So he told him everything I gave him. And, so here I was. I had nothing to lose now. They had given me 6 more cases, and I just had nothing to lose. I didn't feel it. But always in my mind, I remember my grandmother always preaching to me. And almost everything that she had ever told me had come to pass in my life. And I, as a child, had an oncurring dream. right? And this is from since I can kind of remember until I was about 18. Kept having this dream, man, and couldn't figure out. In this dream, I'm running, and I'm on a sidewalk, and I start being shot in the back, and I'm leaking everywhere, blood, and I can't get up. I'm paralyzed, and I can't get up off the ground, and I'm dying. And I smell this stench, and I could never figure out what that stench was. And I probably had this dream 50 times in my life, same dream. And here I am, 28 years old or so, and this woman I know, I meet her, and she's got a lab. She makes methamphetamine. She said, "Ronnie, I got this deal for you." She goes, "I'll make it. You sell it. We'll split the cost." So I was selling $2,500 a day worth of methamphetamine. 1,000 for her, 1,000 for me, and 500 for worth of chemicals. And she was cooking about a quarter pound about every day. And you don't think, but I had a whole door stuffed full of it. I had so much I couldn't sell it more, because she just kept making it. But I called him into the room one day, and she was cooking. She goes, "Ronnie, I want you to smell something." I said, "What you mean?" She goes, "Here." She popped the cork on the flask, and it was that smell. It was that exact same smell that I had been smelling since I was a little boy. There's no mistaking red and black coke methamphetamine. You know exactly what it is. Iodine, red pulp, And I was stunned. And this woman used to look at the flask till she seen the demon, she said. She was into white witchcraft, so she says. But she would cook that stuff until she seen the face. But it was the same demon. It was the same demon from my childhood. It's been the same thing through that whole thing. I got out of there. Shortly after that, they got kicked in. They drove a tank up into their yard in Lee Summit. That's when my partner gave me up on the robbery and all that. Well, let me get to that. Working, I walked in on something that I shouldn't have, and I snapped out, and I got a cold 100 called on me. And this is what happened. I go into this house, and this girl that I know, I'd been selling chemicals to, red and black. And because my partner had stole a whole truckload. They had a semi-truck full of chemicals. And that was a big thing, in the 90s there, where you could cook it everywhere. And it was a lot of money. But I was selling these chemicals, and she owed me about $1,000, so I took my little crew over. She hadn't talked to me. She'd been dodging me. So I go up to the house, and there was a little girl standing in the doorway, and the screen open, and she was crying, and she kept pointing back. I said, "Your mama here?" And she was just pointing towards the back of the house. So I had a pistol and all that on me, and so we go into the house, and there's a door cracked, and there's a girl sitting on the bed, and all she has on is her panties. And this guy standing over her, an older man, and the mother's taking pictures of this going on.